Hey everybody, this is Alicia Johnson and
Mike Johnson. Forgot my name.
oh gosh, and welcome to our very first webinar on forgiveness. So we're going to just wait for some people to pop in. We're doing this a little bit differently tonight. We're going to do it on Zoom as well as Facebook. So with that, we've got two technologies going at one time. So we're trying to figure this out. So this is our first time doing this, so bear with us. Tonight is the night that we are coming together to discuss our journey in forgiveness. And for those who are new to us, I am Alicia Johnson. I'm the creator of Always Journal. And my husband here, Mike Johnson, Mike Cullen, you want to introduce yourself?
Mike Cullen. So let me, a lot of people out there know me as Mike Johnson.
No,
I
Mike
grew up,
Cullen. Okay.
well, a lot of people know me as Mike Cullen, but a lot of people that, I grew up with know me as Mike Johnson. A lot of people never knew my middle name because it was something that, growing up that I was ashamed of and really never put out there.
What's your middle name?
Middle name, yeah. So, long story, grew up not knowing my dad. We'll get into this a little later, but for a large part of my life, I didn't know my dad, and I finally met my dad at 37. And when I met my dad, it was a change in my life. It was a pivot in a lot of stuff that I was doing, and it was almost symbolic. So when I met my dad and found out that his middle name was Cullen as well, it really for me, it kind of shifted some stuff. And I kind of looked at my middle name a little different. And, my biological father has since passed. So I've always used that last name just, really as a symbol, for not only who he wasn't in my life, but who he was for me at the age of 37. So
there we have it.
There we have it.
There we have it.
So when people
the mystery has been revealed.
I hear it all the time. People will say, who's Mike Cullen? And I'm like, that's me. That's just my middle name. And then a lot of people know us as Alicia or Mike and Alicia Johnson, and they always kind of wonder, why do you guys have
different last names? So we are officially married. Yeah. We do have the paperwork.
My full name is Michael Cullen Johnson. So there you have it. When you see Cullen, that's what it is. So.
Okay. All right. That's good. Might be explaining that because that was. All right. So tonight we can just dive right into the webinar. So one of the things that we've been married for 22 years now, and we have developed a soft spot, if you will, for married couples that are pretty much like we were, just staying together, trying to keep it together, trying to make this thing work, but not having all of the pieces and not understanding how to maneuver the craziness. And so we had mentioned earlier today in our talk with Glenn Brooks, right, that every marriage has its own brand of crazy. And so once you identify your own brand of crazy, then it becomes a little bit easier to know what the elephant is in the room and what you're working with. And so with that being said, that is where we are going to go this evening, is actually describing what our elephant in the room was and the mess that our relationship was. And so I can give it from my perspective, and then you can jump in. So for me, the marriage initially started out as it was fun. Like we had we dated for a long time. We dated for probably about 4 or 5 years, yep, before we got married. And so in that time, we had become pretty good friends, and we had developed a pretty decent relationship as it relates to being friends and getting along in that way. But once we got married and we threw in the marriage piece, that was a whole nother ballpark, because you can't, before when we were dating, we lived separately for a long time, and I don't think we didn't really, we moved in together with each other just before we got married. Like
probably a year and a half.
Before we got
before
married.
Yeah.
Right. So we were playing house for a minute. So that was, I mean, you know, we weren't official. I mean, at any point we could have, either one of us could have had it up and just kind of, you know, left. So it wasn't official. So it wasn't until it became official and we, you know, sealed the deal and tied the knot, and then things got real, because we had children. We had our son like as soon as we got married. Like we started with kids in our marriage. Yeah. And so we didn't really have the time to grow together as a couple. And so that is where, as a married couple, yeah. So I think that's where probably the problems on my part began. Because being thrust into the not thrust into the relationship, but going into the relationship, becoming a new mom, we were new homeowners, everything was just new. And so we have all of these things, and then like once the pressures of life started to kind of settle in on us, that's when you really get to see who people are, is once the pressure really starts to set in.
Right.
And so with that, I think that's when I started to break. Like the pressure for me, I think the pressure for me started to hit earlier than for you. I started to give into the pressure. I started to give into, am I, you know, a good enough wife? I'm comparing myself to other relationships, gauging our relationship based on what other people were saying and doing, and then feeling sort of alienated because your communication style at that time was very challenged, if you will.
Say what it was.
you were shut down a lot. Like when we were dating, that was a different scene. But when you're living with someone, that, you know, like you don't have anywhere else to go. You have to communicate. You would have moments of like shutting down for like almost days. Like you would only talk when you had to talk. Mm-hmm. Like, and that I started to take that personally. Okay. And so because I started to take that personally, I began to feel alienated. And because I began to feel, and that's the thing you have to start to pay attention to, is what your emotions lead to. So my emotions led to that feeling of alienation. And that's where I started to drift off and started to want to just talk to people outside of the relationship just for that communication piece. Okay. And so, you know, I think most people know our backstory. So one thing led to another, and, you know, that's where my end of the relationship started to conclude. Okay. Because I was seeking, you know, validation and communication and all of those things. And so you want to pick up on your side.
So, I like the way you said it, floated.
It did. I messed it up. I mean, my end, that was my side of the story, but you have your contributions too. So,
You know, so as, you know, I started, you know, just kind of giving that backstory on my dad and the fact that my dad wasn't in my life. So, you know, and this is funny because I had this thought earlier that communication in particular was non-existent, you know, now that I look back on it, because there of that root cause, a root issue of not having my dad in my life. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I was thinking earlier of how, you know, even today, I'm challenged in, you know, certain ways where, you know, if I'm in a setting, particular settings, you know, I'm not the person who's loud and, you know, out there just, you know, communicating with everyone. That's just not my style. Never has been. Mm-hmm. And, you know, as I was thinking, I was just looking back to that relationship with my dad and understanding or thinking that, you know, a lot of that is because, you know, as a kid, you know, going into my teenage years and into marriage, just with these feelings or things where, as a kid, I used to just kind of go off to myself because I was dealing with this thing of not knowing my dad internally, and so I would just kind of go off on my own, and not necessarily want to communicate with anyone, because I was dealing with this thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I held that on as a kid, all the way up until adulthood, and as an adult, when you have those things that you carry, and you just continue to carry them throughout a marriage, throughout kids being born, throughout jobs. It's like you never really shake that unless you take out your shovel and really start hitting at the root and finding out what is the root problem. It's just like, I talk to a lot of people about health and fitness, and one of my things is, yeah, there's a weight problem. There's a problem. You need to lose, 10 pounds, 20 pounds, or whatever. But, and that's fine. What I want to work on is finding out how you gain the weight. And a lot of people don't deal with that root. So for me, it was understanding. Of course, now I understand that there was a root problem. So going back, fat, or rewinding to, the messes in our life.
Mm-hmm.
So Alicia had what we call it? She had an affair earlier.
You had to think of the name for it?
Yeah, well, you call it. You said, what did you say? You said an implosion.
I am.
So okay, but anyway, So when I learned of this and it became a part of my world, we had kids at the time, and we had just bought a house. We had a lot of different things going on. We both had demanding jobs, and so I'm dealing with this. I'm dealing with the fact of being an adult with a wife, 2 kids, responsibilities, high responsibilities, and now I have this to deal with. So for me, it really just led to increased anger, rage, drinking, more isolation. So if there was no communication prior to that, there was definitely an even weakened communication after that. So the situation, the marriage situation, had really taken it took a turn for the worse.
Mm-hmm.
Simply because, now if I fast forward again, simply because as a male or man, a teenager going into manhood, I didn't understand the importance of digging up the root.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, when we talk about forgiveness, and so if you take it from forgiveness and you look at whatever it is that you're trying to forgive someone for, look at that thing and then go back a little further. What's the root?
Right. And I think that with our relationship, once we have the background story, and we know like what, my contributions and your contributions to the overall dynamic of what we were working with. And so that was the situation. So the situation was that there was poor communication. The situation was that there were unresolved issues from our past that we brought into the relationship. And then to compile that, the uncertainty of what a marriage required as it related to a new family, finances, and all of that. So we were brewing like the perfect storm. And so over time, and this is where the forgiveness work, unfortunately, we missed it a lot. Because the situation that we described, although it sounds really simple, there was poor communication. I had an affair. Mike was angry. All of these things. So it sounds like, we can resolve this. We can talk about it. We can do, whatever we need to do to get it done. Unfortunately, that is not how most couples handle the situation. Like, we take the situation and we just compile more stuff on top of it, put gas on it, gasoline on it. And so that is what happened. So all of that happened probably around 2003, 2004, 2002, 2003. So fast forward to about 2014. And that is when we actually started to do the work. So if you want to do the math on that, that took almost 10 years of us, actually being angry with each other, competing with one another, and at that point, like after I confessed, I was ready to let it go. I was ready to like move on and just like release it. But unfortunately, that's not the way it turned out, because my release led to your retaliation.
Yeah.
And so, if you want to speak to the retaliation piece.
Yeah. So the retaliation piece was me, and I think coming up going into marriage, I had always looked at myself as someone who was, I guess you could say, loyal to a fault. And what I learned, from the situation was no, I wasn't necessarily loyal, and let me say it this way: I wasn't necessarily loyal, but I did find out that I am highly revengeful. I was highly revengeful.
Yeah.
So if there was something,
I can attest to.
and I mean, just going back to my childhood days, there were times where I remember, things happening, and I was always the one that if you hit me, I'm gonna hit you back. That's what I was taught when I was a kid.
Harder than.
So when I found out about it, again, for me, it put my life in a terrible spin where, I went from drinking to really, really drinking. I went to staying out late to really staying out late and many times not coming home. And so the situation, and then, like I say, kids were small during this time. So there was a lot in this, for 10 years. And so that one affair led to two affairs, and it was another affair. There was a total of 3 affairs in this time period. And for me, I think it was, again, I think I said when I was 37, this was almost in the midst of a lot of this craziness. Something had really just got into my heart and told me, you need to tackle the root. You need to find out who your dad is. You need to do the research, look him up, and find out who he is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was the inner part of me just really saying, enough is enough. You can continue to drink. You can continue to do all of these different things to kind of, smooth out the situation from day to day.
Right.
But until you actually dig down and tackle what the main cause for this was, and like we say, we're going back through communication and all these other things that we started the relationship with. And for me, if I really, really think about it, it goes back to not knowing my dad. And so I called him up. I did some research. I found out the name. I found out where he lived. Found out he was right here in the same area that I grew up in. And we had a conversation. The conversation led to him coming over to the house a couple of times. Him meeting you, him meeting the kids, and then us really just having a good relationship. My biological father was really, from what I see at that point in my life, a really good person.
Yeah, he was actually decent dude.
And so we spent a lot of time together, or what I thought was a lot of time together. And there was probably a year that went by that we had kind of the calls had kind of fell off. I had stopped calling. I got busy. He had stopped calling. I think he was in the middle of a move. And I want to say another year and a half it went by, and I started to try to reach out to see, hey, we haven't talked in a while. Let's hook back up. I left a couple messages. I went past his house a couple times. He wasn't there. And, long story short, I had found out probably another several months after that, in talking to or catching up with a stepbrother, that my dad had passed. And I had no clue. So as you can imagine, for me, it was devastating because here it is, someone that had been absent from my life for 37 years, to come into my life and to really kind of make that pivot, make that change in who I was and who I believed I was, to all of a sudden be gone and I not know anything about it. Me finding out, I think I found out, many months after he had passed. So I think I kind of went back into another tailspin. I started drinking and really just trying to figure out what did all of this mean. What did me meeting my dad mean, and just a whole bunch of stuff. And and it's funny. One day I was just thinking about the conversations that we had, the time that we spent together, and I sat down and I really just put it all together, realizing that I had just met my dad, and I thought we had spent a lot of time together, but it was actually, we spent no more than 24 hours together total. Because a lot of times we would just, he would come over for an hour or two, we talk, just stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So as far as being in his presence, it was no more than 24 hours. And probably not much more in talking to him either, just like on the phone. But later on, and this was several years ago, I had the, and this is coming around to the topic of forgiveness. I had the thought, the revelation that, my dad, my biological father, was not put in my life to be a dad, the quote unquote dad or father to me. He was really put in my life to teach me a lesson on forgiveness. And so when I met him, it was at a time that we were really going through our stuff. And of course, I didn't know it at the time. And I look back at it years later and realized that, for me, meeting my dad at 37 was a lot easier than me trying to meet my dad at 20, because at 20, I was very, very bitter, very angry. And so I met him at the right time in my life. And he showed me, when I met him, a lot of compassion. He showed me a lot of just calmness and really just how to act as a man. Mm-hmm. And, in that, my ability to forgive him also showed me that if I can forgive my dad for 37 years of not being anywhere in my life, not mm-hmm. nowhere, mm-hmm. Not even knowing his name, mm-hmm. I could forgive my spouse that I had said I do to. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, I never did. Yeah. Okay, that was good.
That was
so
long.
That was good though, because I didn't know all of that. Yeah. So with the forgiveness piece, now this now ties into the fact that we, the mess. We've identified what the mess was, mm-hmm. and that was the situation, and we missed it a lot because of the anger. We missed it because of the stuff that was just, stacked on year after year, not knowing your father. Now, when we start to get into the forgiveness piece and we start to get into the forgiveness work, this is where it gets a little bit sticky. Because when you start to enter into forgiveness, when you start to want to do something different, knowing what to start with is very interesting. Like when we decided, I think we decided individually, and this is what couples have to begin to understand, is that when you're in a relationship, there are two players, right? And so one person has to be the stand-up person. One person has to be the one that is going to take it for the team. One person has to be the one to say that, I'm going to stand in the gap until my spouse comes around. And so, fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know, that was me. It could have been you? Okay, well, it could have been, but for the sake of this story.
No, it was truly you.
Mhm.
It was truly.
And so, with that being said, for those people who are going to watch this replay or whatever, this is where it is very important for the person that is taking the initiative to do what needs to be done as it relates to the marriage, to realize that when you go first, you're going to be in the first line of defense. Like, you're going to be the one that will probably be attacked the most. You'll be the one that has to endure the brunt of the challenge.
Right.
And so, with that being said, the forgiveness work is not very sexy, if you will. Forgiveness is not something that, some people just say, oh, just forgive and forget. Just forgive and keep moving on. Well, there are layers and levels to forgiveness, and that is one of the things that we want to discuss this evening. The first level that I've identified as we started to go through this work is that personal forgiveness, forgiving yourself, is the first line of defense. So for me, there was a lot of guilt there, because when I started to see everything spiral out of control, I couldn't help but believe at the time and imagine that I was the reason for it all. Like, if I had not done what I did, then everything else would have, worked out, and we could have had this fairy tale, happily ever after marriage. That was in my mind. But once I began to truly understand, and this is where we all have to kind of reel ourselves in to understand that our lives are all like a tapestry. Like, every piece is woven together just the way it's supposed to be. And so everything happens just the way it's supposed to happen. And all of this was part of the plan. So it wasn't like my action caused like this domino effect. It was just the thing that needed to happen at that time so that everything else could play out the way it was supposed to. And so with that, forgiving myself was one of the hardest things I had to do. And as you begin to analyze the situation and what is going on in your life, self-forgiveness is first. And it's just like on the airplane when they say, before you give someone else the mask, you put yours on first. Before you can forgive anyone else fully and effectively, you have to do your self-forgiveness work first. Right. So was that your first line of defense when it came to forgiveness? Like forgiving yourself, or what was your take on it?
Yeah, no, I think that is true. I think there's a part of us that, when someone does us wrong, there's a hardening of the heart. And, a lot of times, if we're on the other side of that, we look at the person and we're interacting with them, but there's a part of us that, every time we see them, there's a part of us that just, pours out, because we know that there's something that we have done. We've done something that has hurt this person, harmed this person. And, I think for me, when it came to, my side of the messes, there was a lot of hurt. You went through a lot of stuff, because this was, something that happened, several times. And, there was a point where I had got to, I forgot exactly where it was. I had got to the place where it was like, and something that came over me and basically said, enough. You cannot do one more thing. And, after that had happened, I went to the place where, I was really carrying around this guilt, this hurt inside of me for being someone that I truly wasn't. I was doing stuff that that really, wasn't in my nature. And it took a while for me to get over that. the fact that I took it where I took it. You know, the the good part of me, the God part of me, is one that will, you know, as they always say, if you're smacked, you just, let it be what it is, and let life deal with that situation. You don't necessarily have to go and go back and smack the other person back. So that's the true nature of who I am. But
you played that other role real well.
Well, like I say, I mean, I think we're all
the alter
citizens.
Ego,
Yeah.
the alter ego.
So
He played. Don't let the smooth taste fool you. He played that role very well. But I think that leads to point number 2, as it relates to the forgiveness piece.
Right.
So forgiving myself was the first part, and then I had to start to forgive you. Even before, and that was the thing, you have to learn to offer forgiveness even before an apology is offered. Like, I started to forgive you years before you ever said you were sorry. Like, there were, we did that for years.
Right.
And so I really had to enter into the space where, and I'll never forget, and this is where you have to, if you're in a couple or, a marriage, you're engaged or whatever, so the first one is forgiving yourself. The second one, in order to start to heal the relationship, is to start to forgive your significant other.
But, just to add on to what you just said, I think, it's important that you forgive the other person, but I also think that, when you do, step out and acknowledge the other person and telling them that you forgive them, I think it kind of washes it out if you're expecting them to, like you said, you were looking for an apology and stuff like that. I think, forgiveness is not necessarily for that other person. It is something for yourself. When you forgive someone,
Mm-hmm.
you're allowing yourself to move past all the hurt and all of the stuff that has went on. Whether that person is apologetic or not,
Mm-hmm.
the forgiveness is for.
And that's not, to be honest, that's not how you enter into forgiveness
Mm-hmm.
the first time. Like, the first time you enter into, like, there are levels to this forgiveness thing.
Mm-hmm.
So the first time you enter into, like, I'll forgive you, it's like from an ego perspective. Like, I forgive you, but are you going to apologize? But then, like, once you realize that apology is not going to come, then that kind of breaks your ego down a little bit more. And so I get what you're saying. Like, you want to forgive for yourself, but that takes a minute to truly understand what that really means.
That's true.
Like, understanding, forgiveness. Now that we've been through all of this, understanding that forgiveness is more for me than anyone else. I get that without a doubt. Like, I forgive real quick now because I understand that.
Right.
But for the novice forgiver, that's not a concept that you really.
Yeah, if you're fresh.
If you're fresh with forgiveness,
agree. I definitely agree with that.
You're not in the mindset of how beneficial it is. And so I think that was the thing with us, for example, when, God was like, you got to forgive Mike. And so you got to stop looking at the transgressions. You got to stop looking at the things that the person, and this is another thing, this may be another conversation, but you have to, we're not condoning like abusive relationships or domestic violence. That is not what we're saying here. There was no abuse or anything in our relationship as far as like physical abuse. If you're in that type of a relationship, then you need to distance yourself from that person. So this is not what we are saying. So if you have to forgive that person, you do it from a distance. Okay, so that I just had to put that out there. But for what we were dealing with, that forgiveness piece was very fascinating to me, because I had to stop looking at Mike as my husband. I had to stop looking at you as a caretaker. I had to stop looking at you as this like you should have it all together type person. I had to look at you as my brother. I had to look at you as a human and realize that just like I hurt, you hurt too. And so that is one of the keys that I began to use to truly forgive Mike. When I started to forgive Mike as my brother, I am my brother's keeper. And that was the thing that sort of held me in place. And, because things kept happening after that, but I had to keep looking at you as someone who was hurting, as someone who was trying to figure this thing out, as someone, all of those things. So, how did that happen for you? Like, how did you come to forgive me? Was it that easy for you with the whole, forgive, you forgave me because it was good for you, or what were your levels to forgiveness for forgiving me?
Well, I think when you first look at forgiveness, it's really just that verbal thing,
Mm-hmm.
that surface.
Mm-hmm.
So when you first put that out there, it's like, yeah, I forgive you, and many times that first one is like, yeah, I forgive you, but I am not gonna forget that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we get to that, it's like you're not in that forgiveness space really.
Right.
So I think honestly, I think for me, it took a while. It was years after that, many years after that, and for me, it really just took me growing up. I was in my 30s, so I was grown. I was a grown man, but mentally, I wasn't grown to the point where I understood that, when you step in front of a pastor or church, and you get married, that death do you part, all those vows that you say.
That got you.
Yeah. So when I really started to think about, Mike, you stood there at the church and you said, I do, in good times and bad times. And this was a bad time. So I had to step back and understand that you signed up for this. You signed up for this. You signed up for all of the good stuff. You signed up for all of the bad stuff. And, going back to my dad, so as I grew and learning that he had passed and just learning, what that relationship meant to me, and going back to the fact that I truly believe my dad was put in my life to give me a lesson on forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
So understanding that and going back and pulling from that, it really just gave me a completely different look on, why we're here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We're not, we're here to make money. We're here to have fun and live our lives to the fullest. But at the same time, there are some principles that we're here to learn for ourselves and more importantly, teach others.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, that it like I say, it took a while, but it came back around to understanding why my dad was put in my life. Not why he, he was part of the reason I'm here, but he was absent in my life and came into my life at 37 for that lesson. Mm-hmm. And that's how it formed for me.
And the forgiveness piece, like you're talking about those lessons that come, like everything happens for a reason. And the older that I get and the more, the closer that I've become in my walk spiritually, that is so true. And so when we started to go through this forgiveness piece, what began to come to me, what God began to show me was that when you look in nature and you start to look at like trees and grass and, all of the things in nature, everything that is closest to the source, everything that is closest to nature, it is very forgiving. Like you cut the grass and it forgives you. It keeps growing back. Okay. When the trees, like in a hurricane or strong winds, the trees just kind of bend with you. And so that was the thing that God was showing me, is that when you are forgiving, that shows that you are closest to the source. Right. But things that are meant to be for your protection are hard and rigid. So, for example, the further that you get away from the source, the forgiveness piece, things get really hard. Like this wall behind us is not forgiving. So if I were to punch it, I would break my hand.
Mhm.
And so that wall is an indicator that is there to protect me and to, keep the structure in place. We're not meant to be that rigid.
Right.
We're meant to be malleable in God's hands so that, heaven can move us and do what needs to be done. And so that's the beautiful part of forgiveness. And that was the thing that I learned the most about forgiveness, is that being forgiving initially helps you to remain malleable and easy to work with. And so that was one of the lessons that I truly learned with that. So if we can go a little bit deeper, so we did the forgiveness of ourselves and we did the forgiveness of each other. And so what I want people to also understand is that when you start to work with this forgiveness piece, you've got to understand that it encompasses everything. It was not just me and Mike that we needed to forgive each other. It was like all of the other things that were contributing to that. And so for me, one of the things that I had to also, I had to forgive like my family, in the sense that with the whole affair thing, I didn't know that in my family, like that was a generational thing. Like there was a lot of history of adultery in our family that I didn't know about. And if I had known those things early on, I would have been able to maybe circumvent some of those things, because I would have known that, hey, this is something like a generational thing. This is something that I have to kind of keep my eyes open for. So like, for example, in our family, I know that like alcoholism is a big problem. Certain things are a problem. So, watching like drinking and stuff like that, but it was the secrets that my family kept that it kind of blindsided me. So that was one level of forgiveness that I had to go through as well, because I felt like I was kind of shortchanged in that information. Like if I had known that this was a problem, then maybe I could have done something, to prevent that. So what are some of the things that you had to forgive outside of us?
Well, I mean, like I said before,
your dad.
My dad. I mean, that's the big thing right there. I had to, forgive him, forgive that entire situation. Then as well, my mom. I had to, and I learned this, later on. I didn't realize that I had developed, this thing with my mom where I wasn't totally connected to her, because I had, as a kid, as a teenager, I had developed this anger, towards my dad, of course, but I had showed it. I showed a lot of that anger to my mom. So and I had this conversation with my mom a couple of weeks ago. Really just telling her, that hey, I apologize, and I just wanted to let her know that, outside of, everything that happened with my dad, in fact, he wasn't there, I'm okay. I'm okay now. I'm okay to talk about it. I'm in a completely different space. And honestly, I'm looking at that entire experience as a lesson, a great lesson. It's a great lesson. A lot of people in that situation never meet their dad. Or if they meet their dad is like someone they don't, I don't want to take nothing from them. Yeah, but I was fortunate enough to meet my dad and find out, who I was, and I found out in the truest form, I am a good person. My dad was like, an above board person. You met him, and just for whatever reason, he wasn't there in my life. And it's funny you said, asking or expecting someone else to forgive you, because my dad never came out and said, I'm sorry. He and I guess, just like you were saying about, your family, with all of the issues of alcoholism and adultery, my dad, one of the things he did share with me and we're getting close on time.
Mm-hmm.
He did share with me that his father was like completely absent in his life.
Mm-hmm.
And he shared that with me, not necessarily, well, I didn't necessarily take it as an excuse, but he pretty much told me that there was a history of this. So everything that he had in him as a teenager or young adult, when I was being conceived,
Mm-hmm.
was the same thing that was in me.
Mm-hmm.
So it was almost a generational thing.
Mm-hmm.
So to answer your question, I go back and I really have to look at. I had to forgive, of course, my dad,
Mm-hmm.
and then also my mother,
Mm-hmm.
because she played a role in it as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I not only had to forgive her, I had to apologize for who I was and who I was acting out
Mm-hmm.
as a teenager.
And then, in addition to that, I know we're coming close to time, but with the forgiveness piece, what we all have to realize is that we're all doing this life thing together. And if you have children in the equation, you also have to realize that you're setting them up as well to have resentment and certain things with them, And so we've had to go through the forgiveness work with our children, because just like we had to forgive each other, there are things, and you have to understand, especially if you're in a household environment, that's a microcosm of society, basically. And so we had this mini world going on, and our children are watching what we're doing, and they have, their take on everything. And so their anger is building up, their emotions and all of that are building up too. And so that forgiveness piece, you have to understand that your ability to forgive others is going to also lend itself to other people forgiving you. So the same way that you were able to forgive your father, the same way I was able to forgive, things that happened in my childhood, we are now opening up the avenue for our children to be able to forgive us easily instead of hanging on. And I think we've also seen that maybe, with our son as well, because we've come a long way with that relationship, and the forgiveness piece, it works both ways. And so as we are kind of going through these, there's so many different areas of forgiveness. So one of the things that we want to express to those who are watching now and who will catch the replay is that as you are starting to approach forgiveness as it relates to being a couple, forgiving yourself first, forgiving your significant other and understanding that they are your brother or your sister and they're human just like you, and then beginning to expand that circle of forgiveness, because once you start to realize how many areas there are in your life that need to be forgiven or that you need to do forgiveness work in, it takes the focus off of the thing that you thought was the main thing is no longer the main thing. Like once I started to do deep forgiveness work, I had to forgive God because I was angry with God for allowing a lot of these things to happen. Angry with, just my friends who were happy, because they seemed like they had it together. So it's so many different levels to forgiveness that you just have to break it down.
Okay. So what about triggers?
Triggers? Oh, you will be triggered.
Yeah. What are your thoughts? I mean, so after you went through the process of forgiving,
mm-hmm.
I think it's important to also understand that we're not punching bags. And so after you forgive someone and that person is continuing to do the very thing that you forgave them for, I think there's a point also that you have to take forgiveness and still forgive, but take yourself out of that situation. So and when I say triggers, I guess I'm saying what are the effects of not forgiving, and what happens when there's something that triggers the feeling that you had before you forgave.
Oh, okay. We've been through. We go through
And
this.
this is quick. We're at 7:50.
Okay, see, this is about to be a trigger right here because it's time thing. So anyway, 7:56. The trigger of forgiveness or lack of forgiveness, understanding there are levels to forgiveness. So when you forgive, you've got to be cognizant of the fact that you forgive at this level, but that's allowing whatever's at the surface or underneath to rise up. And so with the triggers, we've been triggered, a few times, but I think that we bounce back quickly. So it's acknowledging that this is a trigger, that whatever happened before has already passed and is no longer a threat. And so I think that that's how we kind of deal with our triggers, is realizing that the things that we're imagining in our minds is no longer present anymore. And so that's how, dealing with forgiveness for me helps me to move through, because once you forgive, you're releasing the hold that thing has on you.
Right.
So what about you? Are you triggered? I'm probably triggering you right now.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, we are. And I think, we, as humans, we will definitely experience that. We will continue to experience that. Mm-hmm. I think where we have grown is understanding that at the very height of everything that's going on is our dream. Mm-hmm. And once we understand that we're working towards something as a couple that is much bigger than all of the mess that we've been through. So if there's a trigger that comes up, it's like, just look to the mountain. Mm-hmm. Just look to the mountain and understand that there is something that you're fighting for. There is a cause. Mm-hmm. And so, for me, I think it's understanding that there will be triggers. There will be repeated triggers. If it's an adultery type situation, you'll be out. You'll see something. You'll see someone. You hear a song. Something that will take you back to that time.
Oh, really? That's how your triggers work?
Whatever it is. I'm just saying that's how it works different for different people. Uh-huh. But I'm just saying whatever takes your mind, because it's a mental thing. Right. You know how mind works. I mean, it's like you can go from here to 2003
in 0 point.
In 0 point. and I think when that happens, we have to have a process inside of us that automatically takes us out of that travel that we're doing, mm-hmm. that travel to the past, yeah, and go back in the direction of the future. And one other thing that I did want to add before we jumped off here, forgiveness is very critical. So I deal with a lot of people who are looking to lose weight or trying to get their minds right to get into the healthy mindset or healthy lifestyle. And I think there are so many people that don't understand that their inability to lose weight or get into the habits or adapt the habits that will bring that result come from something that they haven't forgave someone for, or they haven't forgiven themselves for. So there's a lot of emotions, tied into forgiveness. And what many people don't understand is those emotions also trigger hormonal type activity that will keep you in different states. If you're not careful. So for me, the lack of forgiveness, pushed me to a bottle. And there was a point in my life, in that time, I want to say I was well over 200 pounds.
Yeah, you were a poor guy.
And I was going in the opposite direction. I was going to the gym, trying to do, what I could do to stay in shape. But I was going north when I was trying to go south, and I didn't understand that because I had all of this stuff locked up inside of me, for my dad, for you, all these other things. And then drinking, eating at all crazy times of the night. I mean, I think, and I guess what I'm saying is we have to understand that forgiveness is very much a root cause. it's just down there with the root. It's not the root, but it's a low level cause that we need to dig down and really work on to attack some of these other issues that we have in our lives.
Okay, I think that kind of wraps us up for this first webinar on forgiveness. And prayerfully, we have shared some tips with you that you can use and that you can begin to at least have food for thought. And so always remember that if we did it, you can do it too. So thank you so much for joining us.
The journal.
Oh, yeah. So for those of you who have checked us out and checked out the webinar and who registered for the webinar, you will receive a discount code to the Forgiveness Journal, which is an e-version of the journal, as well as all of the recordings, so that you can go through this forgiveness work in depth, in detail. And that forgiveness journal is 30 days worth of deep forgiveness, and your life, I promise you, will never be the same. That forgiveness work is for real. So with that, I think we're done for this evening. So we want to thank you so much for taking your time and sharing your evening with us. And join us. We'll be doing more of these. We got issues and topics other than forgiveness. So just follow us, and we look forward to working with you guys soon. Love you all. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.